Hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. Today I'm gonna show you how I made this cute little diorama of a New York building. And I did it because the Flux company sent me their new Beam Air Pro air filter for the laser cutter. It's a lot of words, Beam Air Pro air filter. And yeah, so instead of just doing a test video, I decided to make a diorama and test it that way, which I hope is gonna be much more interesting. So let's begin. This is the Flux Beambox Pro laser cutter that I own, and I usually vent the fumes outside the window, but now I'm going to hook it up to the Beam Air Pro to be able to test it. The installation is very straightforward. You just need to plug the power cord and the USB cable. Then I connected it to my Beambox Pro and attached the ventilation hose. Then I nicely tucked it next to the cabinet. So we were in New York a month ago just to do some sightseeing and to visit our friend Stepan who lives there. We walked all around the city and saw a lot of cool stuff. I mean, it's an impressive city to say the least. So I was inspired to build this miniature diorama of a random New York building. The first thing I had to do was to draw the facade in Illustrator and place the holes for the windows where they needed to go. I also used this brick texture that needs to be black and white, and I told the laser cutter to engrave it on the plywood. This is a really nice feature. The laser cutter ignores the white parts and engraves the black parts, which leaves a very realistic brick texture. This whole job took 30 minutes because engraving is much slower than cutting, and it was a great test for the Beam Air Pro because, as you can see, it was producing a lot of smoke. I was checking if there was any smell around the Beam Air Pro, but I really couldn't smell anything. Of course, I'll test it some more as the project continues. Here's the final facade. The next thing I needed were the windows. I cut them out of 1mm thick cardboard, which obviously produces another kind of smell. It's a burnt paper smell, but the air in the room was again clean. I primed the facade with grey primer and then I sprayed white over it. I mean, I only needed white, so I didn't really think this through, but you know, whatever. Sometimes I spray first and ask questions later. The windows will be dark grey in the end anyway, so for them this primer was okay. Next I modeled some of these trims around the door in 3D and the door as well. I did it in a lovely little 3D program called Blender. I nicely arranged all the parts and then I sent them to another program called Cura, where I chose the settings for 3D printing. It also shows you how the process of printing will look and you can see all the layers and you know, it's pretty cool. So here are all the printed parts. I then used my technique for filling the print lines and smoothing the prints. I just dilute some wood filler with water and paint it over, and when it dries it will smooth the prints. While that was drying, I cut some strips of extruded polystyrene on this hot wire cutting machine, and I started modeling the lower part of the facade. These are probably concrete blocks or slabs of stone, and they protrude a little bit from the facade. I also built the stairs and glued a decorative element on each side of the first step. By now the 3D printed parts were dry, so I primed them grey as well. And now it was time for the fun part, painting the bricks. I just mixed different shades of orange, adding some more red or yellow paint for different parts of the facade. I didn't want it all to be the same color of orange, of course. That wouldn't look realistic. In real life everything is not perfect, right? So it's always good to make it a little bit splotchy. While I had the red paint on the palette, I painted the door as well. Although the red paint didn't cover the grey primer that well, so I'll have to apply some more coats later. I engraved some lines on the pavement to simulate broken pieces of concrete. Oh, I got a message. First with an X-Acto knife, and then I traced them with a pencil. Just a regular pencil works great for this because the graphite is smooth and it just slides in the cracks nicely. Then I smeared some diluted wood filler again, all over the concrete and stone parts to make them more firm when it dries, as well as to give them some texture that will hopefully look concretey, you know, like concrete or stone. Then I sprayed a nice clean coat of grey on the windows. I mean, this makes a lot of sense, right? Spraying grey on grey, but I use acrylic paints with the airbrush and it dries more matte than the primer, so I like that finish. Doors could now get a couple more layers of red paint, and it's much more tidy to spray it anyway than paint it with a brush, so this is even better. And then I painted concrete parts grey. You can see how I'm trying to mix different shades of grey. Some parts are darker, some parts are more beige, you know, just trying to make it more organic. This is a fantastic technique that some of the regular viewers of our channel might remember. I used it when I made the NASA wall for the Splashback movie. I'm using just regular plaster and I'm brushing it all over the bricks with the intention to leave as much as I can in the cracks between the bricks. Then I dip the brush in the water and soak it all. The water will activate the plaster and it will eventually harden. If there's any excess plaster on the raised parts of the bricks, you can always wipe it with a damp tissue. And basically it will stay only in the cracks, leaving a realistic mortar look. Then I glued in all the windows and I cut small pieces of some transparent foil to simulate the glass. You can see it here on the left. Now I could finally detail the facade with 3D printed elements. I glued these things above the windows. I do not know the name of them and I'm way too lazy to Google it. But if you know how these things are called, you can tell me in the comments. And I also glued these things that go beneath the window, whose names I also don't know. Yeah, but this is very informative. Then I glued the AC units. Did I even show how I painted them? I guess I didn't record that part. It's just a 3D printed AC unit and it was painted white. I'm using wood glue here, hence the white excess around the units, but it will dry transparent, so I'm not too worried about it. Now it was time for the lower parts of the windows. I made them as separate pieces because some of the windows had to be opened to fit the AC units inside, right? And again, every time I glue the transparent sheet first and then the frame over it. Then it was time to glue the door and the decorative frame around the door. It's starting to look like a building, yeah. To make it all look much more realistic, I used a black wash. It's just some black paint diluted with water. You can also use ink. It makes quite a difference on the concrete, doesn't it? The liquid stays in the cracks and it gives them some realistic shading. I gave a coat of wash to the AC units as well. They are exposed to the elements after all, so they should be a little bit dirty. And the doors as well. I did not wash the bricks though, because the white mortar would just turn black and that would be a disaster. It would look really bad. It would just look weird. I went back to Illustrator and designed this fence, which I hoped I'll be able to cut on the laser cutter. The bars on the fence are very slim, right? And there's all these filigree details, so I had to do it twice actually. First time I burned it because the settings on my laser cutter were too high and you know, all the pieces just fell apart. So then I changed some settings and the second try was okay. I had to clean the excess material very carefully because this is just cardboard, so it's very fragile. The fence was then painted black and I carefully glued it in place. Then I glued the fence posts on the stairs and this other piece of the fence that connects the posts to the building. Okay, oh my god, this is a fantastic technique I saw on a Small World Workshop YouTube channel. That guy makes fantastic miniatures, so I gotta give him a shout out. He has this amazing tutorial for trash bags. You take a piece of the actual trash bag and you fuse it together with a hair iron that you borrowed from a woman in your life. Then I trimmed the excess material and I cut it into two parts. Then again I melted the bottom part and now you can stick the tweezers inside, pinch the bottom of the bag and pull it inside out. I mean, this is brilliant, right? So in the tutorial he then fills it with sand and I didn't have any sand, but I had some leftover plaster, you know, from the mortaring job, so I used that. And finally, you wrap the top of the bag a few times and again press it with the iron. Some of my bags leaked, but some were okay. Plaster is obviously not the best thing to use with the black bag. I mean, yeah, I have to remember that for the future. Then I just had to cut the tops and they looked pretty good, you know, it's a beautiful technique. The windows on the building were transparent, so I had to print some images of the windows and I glued them to the back of the building just to cover them up. And I also printed some miniature newspaper and tiny flyers and carefully cut them out. Look, they're so tiny, these flyers, right? It's kind of cute. Alright, and now it was time for the fun part, dirtying up the street. I wanted to make this diorama very dirty. My experience of New York was that it was kind of filthy, right? But I guess that's normal. There's millions of people living on a relatively small space and it's extremely crowded. And there are overfilled trash cans in front of every building, and especially now during summer, they really started to stink, you know? So I really tried to bring this wonderful experience to my diorama. Don't get me wrong, of course, I mean, I like New York in general. It's very impressive as a city. The other day somebody asked me like, how did you like it? And I said, you know what? New York is the citiest city I've been to. I think that's a good description of New York. So anyway, I just glued random bits of paper and dirt and leaves, you know, and as a cherry on top, I added this strategically placed dog shit on the pavement. And I think it brought a nice poetic balance to the whole thing. Then I did another wash, but this time with dirty beige paint. When you wash black parts, like this fence for example, it's good to use light paints because it kind of looks like accumulated dust. But we are still not done. Fire escape. Let's be honest, a New York building wouldn't be complete without a fire escape. So I built some parts in 3D again and 3D printed them, and the railings were drawn in Illustrator and cut with a laser cutter. You know, this last trip to America was the first time that I actually stepped on a fire escape. Although it was in Boston, not in New York, but it still counts. We were visiting a friend in Boston and you could exit his bathroom window and go out on a fire escape. You know, it was a big deal. To some of you that might sound mundane and unimpressive, but we don't have these things in Croatia. At least they don't look like these charming fire escapes from movies. So yeah, it was truly an event. You know, I felt like Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's when she sings Moon River on a fire escape. I guess when they watch that film, most people want to visit Tiffany's, but I just always wanted to visit a fire escape. So with this flimsy fire escape created, it was time to finally finish this diorama. I first placed a passepartout on it. What a fun word, huh? Passepartout. And then I glued the stairs. I felt this lower part was kind of empty, so I made a plaque as kind of like a title for the whole diorama. But I had no idea where this building actually was, so I wrote corner of Street Avenue, you know, whatever. I had this dirty old frame, which had some pieces of newspaper glued all over, and I thought it would work nicely with the whole trash theme. I placed in the glass, I glued these pieces of wood to the side to support the diorama, and then I carefully placed it in and bent these pins. I turned it around and immediately realized that I forgot to make a doorknob, which would annoy me so much, so I turned it around, bent these pins, and removed the diorama. I made a tiny doorknob and I carefully glued it on the... and of course it flew across the room. Then I carefully glued it to the door, and now the New York building corner of the 2nd Avenue Street diorama was finally completed. And here are a couple of beauty shots in the sun. And to return to the whole point of this video, which was to test the Beamer Pro filter, I will now give you some final thoughts on it. During the work on the diorama, I cut plywood and cardboard, and I really didn't smell anything, but I decided to test it some more. I designed this New York-inspired manhole cover, and I must say that I find it pretty funny how the New York City sewer cover is made in China. So anyway, I used the engraving option again, this time on a piece of wood, effectively creating a cool little coaster. I made 2 of them, and the engraving of each one is a 15 to 20 minute job. So again, a lot of smoke was produced and the machine was running for quite some time, but there was again no smell. And for the end, I did the most rigorous test, and that is to cut acrylic. Because acrylic is notorious for this strong chemical smell, and still, it filtered extremely well. There was no smell at all in the room, until, of course, I opened the lid of the beambox, but that's normal and it happens even when I went outside, you know, just a little bit of smell inevitably lingers inside the machine, so that's normal. It has 3 types of filters inside, and all of them can be changed. When you connect it to your machine, the machine will recognize it, and it will start counting the work hours. So when it's time to change each of the filters, the machine will let you know. Yeah, so that's it. One other thing I would like to point out is that it's pretty quiet because it has a lot of sound insulation inside and you can't really hear the fans. It's as quiet or even more quiet than the laser cutter, so that's pretty good. And it's pretty heavy, it's like 50 kilograms, so I could barely lift it myself. I mean, if you have to carry it somewhere, you would probably need 2 people for that, but it's pretty easy to roll it around. There's a link in the description that will take you to their website if you want to check some more information. And I guess that's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. I should make more of these coasters, they're pretty cool.